These are the Infeed and Outfeed bandsaw extension tables that will be described in this video. This video is a little longer than my normal videos, so I put this index to this video so you can go to a specific section if you want to see something particular related to this video. In this video, I'll be designing and producing both Infeed and Outfeed extension tables for my bandsaw. They can be used with the Accu-Slice System and its long rails, but can also be used when ripping long boards on the bandsaw. The bandsaw has become a major tool in my shop, replacing many of the functions that I previously performed on the table saw. As a result, I've been reorganizing my shop, making more room than I can add these extension tables to my bandsaw. In the past, when I was using the Accu-Slice system with its long rails on the bandsaw, I needed to support these long rails so that they didn't sag and also to reduce vibration. So I started using these poles, which were adjustable, which fit underneath the end of the rail, and that prevented it from sagging and reduced some vibration. This was shown in a previous video I did on slicing long boards with the Accu-Slice system. However, every time I moved the index table, I had to reposition these supports because they didn't move with the index table. So then I started using a roller stand and a small adjustable table that fit underneath these rails, and then the rail would slide on top of that surface. And that worked better, but I felt I needed a better solution. Also, when ripping boards on a bandsaw, I usually positioned a roller stand at the exit of the bandsaw blade to prevent the board from falling down as it exited the bandsaw blade. I needed a solution that was more permanent and more stable, and that would work with both the Accu-Slice system and also in ripping boards on the bandsaw. As a result, I'll be designing and producing both Infeed and Outfeed extension tables for my Laguna Band Saw. In designing the extension tables for the bandsaw, it would be ideal if you could mount the table right to the edge of the existing tabletop, bring it out, and you have a nice perfectly flat surface. But you can't do that with a bandsaw. On most bandsaws, people have a fence, and they have a fence rail which rides over here, usually right close to the top of the tabletop surface. So you have to allow for the clearance of that fence, and also even for your fence to be able to move in and out. So you can't have that table mount right to the edge of the table. Also, with the Accu-Slice system, I normally take my fence off. I don't use my fence anymore on the bandsaw, but I do have a section of the Accu-Slice system that rides below the top of the table surface. So I have to allow for that. So I need to design a bandsaw table surface that runs underneath the table, comes up out to here. So I'll be, putting my bandsaw table extension coming out here to support my rail. And then I can actually put some filler pieces in here as I go along to make up the difference for doing some ripping. So that's the plan, is to create a table that goes underneath, comes up and out, and mounts to the edge of the tabletop here. This is the basic parts I'll be using to construct this table. And I just put this together. This is some scrap aluminum channel that I had in the shop. It's some like 1.5 inch square aluminum tubing, 2 pieces, and then I joined it together with another piece of aluminum scrap to make a nice solid frame. And then this frame now will mount underneath the bandsaw table. And I'll create a piece of a channel. The channel will mount to the side of the bandsaw table, and then that will mount to the these rails. And I'll put a support out in the end to support the end of this rail system. So let me take the Accu-Slice system off my bandsaw, and we'll begin to construct and design this system. The first thing to do is mount my angle iron to my table. Now this angle iron is 1 inch tall by 2 inches wide. And I need it 1 inch high because it can't go above my miter bar slot. So even this, it might be a hair over. I might have to file it down a little bit later. So this angle iron goes the entire length of my table. And I'm going to be mounted to my table by drilling some holes in the end of the table. But this bottom of the angle iron must be flush with the bottom of my bandsaw table. So I've installed a temporary bar here, which is just clamped underneath to give me this so it's perfectly level with the bottom of the table. And I'll do the same thing on this end. that's the correct position for my rail. So I pre-drilled these holes. I've aligned them so that they align in the correct position on the table. This table is not solid metal. It has bars underneath from the casting. So I wanted to drill these holes where you get in between, those casting bars, so that I could get a nut on the back if I wanted to put a nut to tighten these things further. So I just align those as such. I've already pre-drilled and tapped the first hole. So I can go ahead and put my screw in here to mount a position. It's important to remind you my holes be perfectly aligned. So these holes are all 1/4 inch in diameter because I'm using a 1/4 20-inch thread per inch screws. And to get the correct position, I need to get a starter hole. So I'm just using the standard 1/4 inch bit. And I'm just going to drill these deep enough just to mark the center of the holes, so I know where to drill for the tap. And I'm going to be tapping holes in here. I could drill a hole straight through and put screws in the back, but I decided to go ahead and tap the table. Now I can always put additional screws in the back, or nuts on the back, to tighten them up to get them more secure. I'm just drilling this deep enough just to mark the center of the holes. You see how my holes are marked there. I now have another drill bit the size for the pre-drilling a hole for tapping. I said these taps, the tap I'm using here is a 1/4 inch tap, 20 thread per inch. So just go ahead and drill the holes. And then go ahead and tap them. There's not a lot of meat on this table lip, so I may actually put nuts on the back to make sure they're more secure. And I repeat the process for the remaining holes. And then I'm ready to mount my rail. But I'm not using these screws. These screws are a little too short. These screws are longer, so I can put a locking nut on the back side to give it additional strength. Yeah, I'm not going to put the other bolts in yet because I need to drill holes in this plate yet to mount my rails. Let me describe these rails a little bit better. I made these rails 32 inches long, and the outside diameter here is 6 inches. And these rails are designed to mount underneath the table, and I could have just mounted at the very edge, right at the bar. But I decided to take it in further, all the way to the slot for the bandsaw blade, because I can always make it longer just by putting a second set of mounting holes on this. So this right now is 32 inches. It's designed for my 5-foot rail. But if I wanted to attach a longer rail, I could just mount it out here like this. But my purpose right now is to mount it here. So I'm aligning this at this front edge. It's just short of the slot for the bandsaw blade. And the spacing 6 inches is so that it clears the trunnion plate. I can't go over any further because it would hit that trunnion plate. So now I could have just mounted a barway out here and one here and use a great big table. That's another possibility. But I decided to do this for now. So I may add another bar later to give me a larger table. But I just need a table to cover this section of the bandsaw. And I can't put a bar anywhere in the middle because the trunnion plate's all in the way. But I could have put a bar here and a bar back out here. That would have worked also. So my plan is to mount it like this, screw these two together. So the next step is to mark the holes, to put these, to mount these with bolts. I'm actually going to use 2 screws. I then removed the angle bracket from the bandsaw and took it to my drill press to drill the holes. Well, I drilled my holes, so I go ahead and mount my angle iron to the bandsaw table. And I did the same thing on the other side of the table, so both sides will be the same. Now the one thing is this piece of angle iron sticks above the bottom of my miter bar slots by, oh, maybe 4 or 5 thousandths of an inch, not much. So I'll file that so it's flush with the bottom of the miter bar slot. So I'm using a small metal file. And I am going to put some locking nuts on the back of some of these screws just to make sure this doesn't come loose during operation. So I did install locking nuts to each of the screws holding the angle bracket to the side of the bandsaw table. Okay, I'm now ready to mount my rails. And this rail will ride on the front edge of the bandsaw blade, and it'll just clear my trunnion plate. And I'm going to position it in so that it's just shy of the slot for the installing the bandsaw blade. When I originally was designing this, I thought I could have a bar go the whole way across. I almost forgot that I need a place to get the bandsaw blade on, so I ended up cutting it in half to make it shorter. But it would have been nice to make it the full width. And I believe on some bandsaws you insert the blade in here, and then you could put a bar the entire length. Also, this could be made out of wood. I chose metal because it's lighter. This is aluminum, it's pretty light, and I think it'll work out nicely. So I'll position this. Okay, it's just shy of the slot for the bandsaw blade. It's flush against the front of the table. And I'm using these are pieces I made a couple years ago in a video I did on making an extended table this way for the bandsaw. And this was designed for my mag jigs, so my mag jigs can clamp out here further to cut wire boards. So I'm using that edge as the side for this rail, but normally you just have that flush with the front edge of your bandsaw blade. Position this to just drill one set of holes first of all, and then I can remove the clamps. Use a standard 1/4 inch bit again, drill into the same holes that I put in the angle iron. So I'm just using some 2-inch bolts here. I then repeated the process to install the second set of support rails to the infeed side of the bandsaw table. I just mounted my Accu-Slice with the Accu-Slice 2 carriage on it to make sure everything aligns, and it looked pretty good until I pushed it in and I felt a stop. And when I checked, it's like a 1/2 inch away from the blade. And what's happening is my piece that comes down on my Accu-Slice is just touching the tip of this rail. And I measured it, and the difference between the top of the plate and the bottom of there versus there to there is 150 thousandths of an inch, just a hair over 1/8 of an inch. So I have to make some modification to lower this rail somehow. I could do a couple of different things. I could put some washers in there, do a quick easy fix. That's one issue. I could remake these brackets, to lower them, or drill new holes and move it. That could be done also. I could just mill away a portion of the top surface of this rail, and that would just weaken the rail. I don't especially want to do that. So I think the best option is to put some spacers between the rails and this angle iron. And ideally, 1/8 of an inch would not be enough. 3/16 would probably be ideal. But I didn't have any 3/16 in stock. But I do have some 1/4 inch pieces. This was some scrap over another project, and I can put this between the rail and this angle iron, and that actually gave me about a 10/1000 inch clearance between this bottom portion on the Accu-Slice table and the rail. So that gave me a good clearance. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and I'll take the Accu-Slice off. I'll mount these underneath, re-drill the holes, and put I need some larger carriage bolts in there to mount that in place, but that'll work fine. So that's the process that I'll be doing now, is mounting these spacers. I got my spacers all ready. So you just clamp these in place and then drill the holes to mount it. I'm drilling 1/4 inch diameter holes in the same position as the holes in the L brackets. And I'm going to drill one additional hole out here. I'll have to clamp the two together so it just doesn't rattle. After attaching the spacer between the aluminum L bracket and the support rails, I attached the two together using 3-inch carriage bolts. I then repeat the process and install the spacer on the outfeed table. So it clears all the way now. I have good clearance now. Okay, the next thing is to get some legs, because this does have a little bit of vibration out here. So I want a leg to support it. But this leg has to come off, or at least tilt, in order to put the bandsaw blades on, because the bandsaw blades have to come around here to go in. So this needs to come off pretty easily. So I'll be putting it on with probably a carriage bolt with a wing nut, so it can come off or at least tilt very easily. So this is a piece of 1/4 inch square tubing. I did put a rubber piece on the bottom, and I did bevel the top so that it can tilt. So the next thing is, and I drilled a hole, and this will go through this bar here. I may put 2 on eventually, but for now I think 1 will be enough out here. So let me go ahead and drill a hole in this out here. I have a 3-inch carriage bolt here. And a wing nut. And that's real good. So let me repeat the process on the other side. Now I'm ready to start installing the tabletops, and the distance is almost 1.5 inches. So there's one piece of MDF. I'm going to put a second piece on there. Move it into the table. Let's put a straight edge on that. And I have less than 1/8 of an inch clearance. So if I use a spacer in there, that should just about be perfect. So what I may have to do is do something like that. Put some spacers in here. And that should be a perfectly flat table. Let me put the Accu-Slice on, see how that's going to work out. Now on this top piece, I have to allow, of course, for this down piece from the Accu-Slice System, but I also have to allow for the miter bar. So the easiest thing is just to cut out a square. Okay, so there I cut out my slot. And put this here in the line where I want it. Go ahead and clamp it like it's going to be. I put some 100,000th inch thick spacers in the middle, and that brought the table up perfect. So now I'm going to mount this with 4 carriage bolts. And I do want to countersink the heads of the carriage bolts, so let me drill the countersink first. I use a Forstner 1/2 inch bit to drill holes about 1/8 of an inch deep, just deep enough to cover the head of the carriage bolts so they don't stick above the top of the table. I then drilled a 1/4 inch diameter hole through both sheets of the MDF and through the aluminum support beams. I then clamped everything together using 4-inch carriage bolt with hex nuts. And that's perfect. I went and installed the 6-foot rail on the system, and the table is perfectly level with the bandsaw table, but the rail rides actually 1/4 inch above the table. But yeah, when your board's on here riding, the board rides on this table. So the rail has to stand up 1/4 inch. So I just got some scrap 1/4 inch plywood to put underneath there on both sides. So the rail now is flat, running on the new table. The board is riding on both tables. And I have let's see how long this board is. I think this board's around 4 foot long. This board's actually 50 inches long. It extends past the Accu-Sled table by about 10 inches on each side, which is more overhang than I normally use. So we'll see how this works, cutting a 50-inch long board on a 30-inch carriage using this the new tables. Vibration should be less, and we'll see how it works. I have a 1/2 inch wide blade, 8 teeth per inch. And this is an old blade, it's not a new blade, it's just one I had laying here in the shop, so it's not a brand new blade. For viewing purposes, I'm showing this video at 10 times the actual cutting speed. I prefer to cut very slowly because the slower you cut, the smoother the cut. That worked pretty good. There was no vibration on the end of the rail as I was cutting, which I normally see. And the carriage actually extends beyond the length of the rail, by about 6-8 inches. But all the roller bearings are touching on the rail. And the cut's pretty smooth. This is an 8 teeth per inch blade. So let me try cutting a board, say 25,000 inch thick, and then we'll look at the measurements on the board. As I'm cutting here, notice the end of the rail. There's almost no vibration on the end of the rail. A definite improvement over the previous system without the extended tabletops. This small box showing the end of the rail is actually at 3 times actual magnification. And that cut came out very good. Very smooth surface with very minor bandsaw blade marks. And that's an 8 teeth per inch blade. I took about 10 measurements along the board on both edges and top to bottom. And the dimensions vary between 21 thousandths and 23 thousandths inch thick. So let's go and cut a piece 10 thousandths of an inch thick. So this is the resulting piece of cherry. It's right around 10,000 of an inch thick. Pretty straight and flat. Let's do some measurements on this again. Again, I took about 12 measurements along the entire length and both sides of the board, and the dimensions vary between 7 and 8.5 thousandths of an inch thick. So it's in review, adding these extension tables definitely reduces the vibration on the rail. It rides smoother. I don't see any visible vibration on the end of the rail. It runs smoother. Definitely, I think it's worth the effort, and I'll be using this for slicing longer boards. And this next board is a piece of maple. It's 3 inches tall, and again, it's mounted on my Accu-Sled 2. This board is 48 inches long, so it's overhanging my carriage by about 9.25 inches. Let's go and cut a piece, again, 25 thousandths of an inch thick. The blade I'm using here is a 1/2 inch, 8 teeth per inch bandsaw blade. It's fairly old and it is getting dull. I'm starting to smell some burning, and I am getting some shadow marks on the board as I'm cutting it. So it definitely is dull and it is slow cutting. And that cut pretty nice. Let's do some measurements here. I got 24.5 thousandths, 24.5 thousandths, 25 thousandths, 24 thousandths, and 24 thousandths. So it came out pretty nice. Pretty smooth. That blade is getting dull. I'm starting to see some shadow marks on here. That's a pretty old blade. But it worked. Yeah, I can tell it's getting to be an old blade because I'm getting some shadow marks. And my sawdust is like a dark brown, where it should be white because this is maple. So now I'm going to go through changing the bandsaw blade, because with this longer table on now, it makes it a little more cumbersome changing the bandsaw blade. This blade is dull, and I do want to demonstrate ripping a board. So I want to change the blades. I don't have any more 8 teeth per inch blades, but I do have a 6 tooth per inch blade, so I'll put the 6 tooth per inch blade on there. To install the bandsaw blade, I must first remove the leg on the Infeed table on the bandsaw. So I just loosen the wing nut and remove the leg. That's why I made more room in my shop so I can walk around it now. So I moved some equipment out of here. So I have enough room here, I can swing the blade around here like this. That's why the leg had to come off. I had a space here between these two rails, so I take the blade completely off. Now I'm installing a new 1/2 inch, 6 teeth per inch bandsaw blade. The gap between the rail and the tabletop is a 1/4 inch, which is actually the thickness of my Accu-Slice table. So in the past I just used a piece of 1/4 inch plywood as a spacer in there to keep it level. But I wanted to make something more permanent. So I took a piece of 1/4 inch aluminum. This is a 1/4 inch thick, 3 inches wide by about 22 inches long. And I'm going to put this underneath. But to make it permanent, I'm actually going to attach it to the rail. This rail has channels in the bottom, And I inserted some nuts into that channel, and I drilled holes and countersunk it in this plate. And I use these flathead 1/2-inch screws to actually attach this plate to the bottom of the rail. And these screw holes are countersunk, so these flathead screws will be flush with the bottom of the plate. And I did install these spacer plates on both ends of the rail. So now when I attach this rail to the Accu-Slice, it's perfectly flat. And this front edge of this plate is even with the front edge of the rail. So now when I slide my rail in and out, there's nothing to reposition. Everything is perfectly straight and flat. So next I want to rip a board on this new setup with these 2 extension rails. And I did take the fence off my bandsaw probably about 3 years ago. I don't use the fence anymore. But I use the Accu-Slice rail as a fence, which works good on boards up to like 2.5 inches thick. I wouldn't use it on real thick boards, but boards of this size. This is a piece of maple, 2 inches thick, about 6 inches wide. And I'm going to rip off a 2-inch wide piece of this board. And this board is about 50 inches long. Again, it's 2 inches thick. And so I'm using the Accu-Slice rail as my fence. So I'm just pushing the board up against the fence. And I'm using one of these bigger things to keep the board tight so it doesn't wander too much. And it actually works pretty good cutting ripping boards with the fence on the opposite side of the bandsaw blade. In fact, I seem to see less drift with the fence on this side of the blade. So I don't know why, but just for some reason I see less drift. So let me go ahead and cut this board. It'll be again 2 inches wide, 50 inches long. I'm using a new 1/2-inch wide by 1/16 per inch blade. It was just previously installed. And it definitely cuts much smoother and much faster with this new sharp blade. And that worked nice. It's nice having this outfeed table so this board doesn't fall off as I push it through the bandsaw blade. And there's the resulting cut on that blade. You see, it's perfectly smooth. There's no saw marks, no burn marks. And I can barely see the bandsaw blade marks on that. It's pretty good. This concludes this video on making these Infeed and Outfeed extension tables for my bandsaw. It took me about a full day to both design and build a system and make several modifications along the way to improve the performance of it. But it definitely reduced the vibration of the bandsaw and the rails. The ends of the rails, as I'm cutting boards, I saw no vibrations at all. Definitely a major improvement of the vibration. And of course, the less vibration you have, the smoother the cuts. In fact, by having these extension tables on the bandsaw, it's seen actually reduce the entire vibration of the entire bandsaw. And I was able to slice some cherry and some maple boards. These are over 4 foot long, and I was able to slice pieces that were 25,000 inch thick and accurate within 1 or 2 thousandths the entire length and width of the boards. I also ripped a piece of maple that was 2 inches wide using the Accu-Slice rail as my fence. And again, that worked quite nicely, and there's no burn marks or saw marks on the board from making that cut. So in retrospect, I'm quite happy with the system. It worked very well. It definitely reduced vibration and gives me smoother cuts. So I'll be using this going forward for doing a lot of my cutting of boards from various projects. In fact, I'll probably even use it with my Accu-Wedge because I think it reduces the whole vibration of the bandsaw, so I should even get smoother cuts. Once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or concerns, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'd be happy to talk with you. Once again, thank you.